I find that people either love logic games or they hate logic games. So what's your take on logic games, and what's your number one tip for people to improve logic games? Because I found that it is the easiest to improve, and you can get 100% consistently, unlike with logical reasoning or reading comp. So what's your number one tip for people that, might be struggling with logic games now and hate them?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say do a lot of games. That's the only way to get better at them is through increased familiarity. And I love them now. They're my favorite section now. Maybe they're kind of tied with logical reasoning, maybe, but I'd say that they're my favorite. They're one of my favorites now. I love them now because they're so mathematical. And I'm not a math person, but the kind of way of thinking they test is actually pretty streamlined. There's not that many varieties that they can have on the exam. And so if you've done a handful of the older games, then you'll be well prepared for whatever you might encounter on LSAT test day. So at first, of course, you're going to bomb them. That's normal. That's natural, especially if you're from more of a humanities background. But you do them by type and grouped by style or format. For example, there are a lot of games that have repeated over time with only slight variations. I have a whole list of them I could rattle off, but I'll give one example. There's this game from Prep Test 33, Game 2, which is The Birds in the Forest. It's a classic logic game that's often used for instructional purposes because it tests these basic concepts in a very straightforward way. And there have been like 6 other games on the LSAT over the years in subsequent exams that are just like it. And so if you master that old one, you'll be ready for the new ones that come later.
Right. And that's so true because, the more that you do them, the more you see similarities. And maybe it might be birds in a forest in one game, but the next test, like 3 years later or something, don't quote me on that, it might be colors of hats on different people. But
Yeah.
I found that when I was studying for the LSAT, my logic game books was also the smallest. It was the thinnest of all of the big, large books. So I brought it around with me everywhere. And I can personally say that that is what helped me get the score I got on logic games, was just doing a lot of them and getting to a point where you can score 100% consistently because you can predict and you can have fun with them. It's not like reading comprehension, which might be boring depending on what the subject is. So I'm a logic games lover. But
Yeah, same. And I should mention, there's also a lot of value in redoing the same exact game again and again and again. That's something I should really emphasize, I think. Like when I first started teaching this exam, the newest book of exams was the set in the 30s, 29 to 38. And I taught those same games like literally hundreds of times. And doing a particular game for the 100th time or the 200th time, I might see a slight nuance that I hadn't seen in any of the previous attempts, or maybe a more efficient way to do it. And so I'm not saying you should do it 100 times, but even doing the same game 5 or 10 times, you'll start to see new angles on it or techniques you could use to solve it that you previously hadn't.
Right. And that's a good point because especially with time, you might see ways that you can, if you're going to draw it out, you could draw it out quicker, or you can save yourself a step and you can I found, and it's a little bit hard to explain, but another tip that I used to increase my logic games performance was playing Sudoku on my phone. There's no real parallel between Sudoku and logic games, but there's something about that way of thinking and getting your brain in that mode where you can, even if you don't draw out every single step you do, like you can calculate the steps in your head and just it makes sense because that's where it has to go and you see it. And so there's that kind of, I can't articulate what that is in your brain or what kind of skill that is, but there is a parallel between games like that, Sudoku, and the logic games and the LSAT. And it's something that, the more you do it, the quicker you are and the more you see connections that maybe you can't articulate, but not everyone's trying to be an LSAT tutor. They're trying to just take the test and get, it's bad for us that I can't articulate it, but it's good for you if like you see the connection and you're just able to make those leaps really quickly.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them, and feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.